Alright. So, and then the last one is the toggles. And toggles are always interior members. Okay? When you're putting the frame together, put up that one corner. You start one corner at a time, put the glue on, frame it up. You want to use a square to square it up. Does anybody remember what square to use to square up the framing? Nope. Just gave it to you. Use a square for the framing. It's a framing square. Right. Okay. So a framing square gives you a larger square so that you can square it up. Speed square is just a little bit small for this large task. If you're making a smaller, flatter platform, you can use a speed square. But the larger your square can be, the more accurate it's going to be to an extent. So square up your corner after you've glued, screw it in. Okay, 2 screws on 2x4s, 2 staples on 1x3s. Once you got that corner, move to the next corner, glue and staple, making sure that you are flushing before you staple or screw on any frames. Everybody remembers what I mean when I say flush. Okay? Right, so if you're putting a corner together, what you're trying to do is consider this board as a plane, a coordinate plane, and this board as a coordinate plane. And you want them to match up so that you don't have any kind of bumps or anything that you can get your fingernail under, anything like that. Okay, you want it to be a smooth surface on all 4 sides. Once you get those two, then what you're going to have to do is glue both of the connections for that last piece of your frame, square them up and screw them. Okay? The reason you have to glue both at that point is because once you get one attached, you won't be able to get enough space in between these 2 joints, or this joint here, to get the glue in without manipulating your frame to a point where it's going to weaken it. Okay? So you want to make sure that you're thinking ahead when you're gluing the joints up. Don't glue all 4 of them at the same time. Glue only the ones that you're going to be working with immediately. Once you get the exterior frame put together, measure out for your interior toggles and screw them into place. Okay, you want to make sure that they're as square with the frame as possible, that they're sitting vertically in their frame instead of kind of cattywampus off of an angle like that. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. At that point, you're ready to put the lid on. Okay? It's a lid on a platform. It's a face on a flat. Okay? Because of their orientation. Lids on platforms are always going to be 3/4 plywood. Okay? The way that you attach facing or lids to any kind of frame, there is a proper modus operandi. First thing you want to do is find your squarest corner, the corner that you think is the best. Okay? And you want to line up that corner of your plywood with the corner of your frame. All right? Make it perfect and flush, just right up at that corner, and fasten that corner in place. Once you get that corner fastened, so for example, we're going to say this corner. Once we get this corner fastened, we're going to work across our small dimension, okay, the 4-foot side, and we're going to force flush as we go. That means that we're going to twist the plywood on top of the frame or twist the frame underneath the plywood to make the frame to make the frame match up with the edge of the plywood. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. That means at some points you might find yourself, because you need to flush just the one spot that you're putting your screw or your staple. Okay. It's easier on platforms because they're a little bit bulkier as far as what they're built out of, so they're less likely to kind of work under smaller pressures. So flats are a little bit harder, but then they're also easier to manipulate to get them to work correctly. Okay. So if I'm trying to flush up this point here, sometimes what can happen is, in order to do that, I have to push the facing or the lid so that the frame is actually sticking out from underneath of it. Okay, exaggerating down at the end so that I can get the point exactly where I need it to be. Does that make sense? It'll make more sense when we're actually building it in person. Okay. But just remember to flush as you go. The reason that I say this, Lumber tends to warp and twist and do all sorts of things as it's drying, okay, as it's curing. So what can happen with your frame is it can be kind of kinked in some points, especially for 1x frames. What can happen is it can be kind of indented in a little bit, obviously not to that degree. But you can pull that wood out. It is still pliable, so you can pull it to get it to where it needs to be. Once the glue dries and it's in place, that bond should be there and be able to hold it. Okay? So we can do that, and we want to force it so that we've got that nice clean frame, that nice clean surface on all 4 sides. Okay? So we flush along the top. As we go, once you get to the end, you come back to the corner that you started in, and you go down the long side, flushing as you go. Okay? Once those 2 sides are secured, your frame is as square as it's going to be. Okay? You can force to an extent if we're talking about bows within the wood itself. Like if the bottom style is bowed in a little bit, you can force that out to get flush with the edge. Okay? But if the corner's not flush, that corner's not going to be flush. That's why we start with our best flush, so that our bottom side of our flats, that'll be on the floor, that can be flush with the floor, and we won't have to worry about any kind of edges. Okay? If there's an edge, I want it to be at the top. If there's any kind of overhang. Okay? So then you fasten those 2 other exterior sides onto your facing or your lid, then come back into your toggles. Okay? Do not forget to do the toggles. In a platform, what will happen, plywood can also get bowed, depending on how it's stored. So if you've got a small dome in the center of the platform, and somebody steps on it, platforms are resonance chambers. So you're going to get a bang from the plywood hitting on the 2x4, and it's going to resonate because of the open space below the platform. Okay, we don't want that. So screw down your toggles to keep that from happening. In a flat, as somebody walks past the flat, a similar thing can happen. The vibrations in the stage will make the facing on the flat hit up against the framing. We don't want that, because then we've got noise that we have to worry about in the show. Okay? So always staple your toggles. Okay? Easiest way to find your toggles, there's 2 ways. You can measure, because you measured to put them in place, so you should know where they are. The other way that I use more often, because it's quicker and easier for me, is to find the screws or the staples for the sides of those toggles. So what I can do is I find the screw here, I make a tick mark right above it on the face. I come over here, I find the screws on the side. I bring the tick mark and make it here. Draw a line to connect them, or use a chalk line to connect them, and then I've got a line that should be right on top of my toggle. Okay? It tends to line it up a little bit better from my opinion, from my experience, because what can happen with the toggles is if they're not sitting perfectly straight or horizontal, vertical or horizontal, if they're cocked a little bit, you will have lined them up to the frame, usually to the bottom of your frame. So if it's cocked a little bit like this, and you're measuring 2 feet that you lined up the bottom of that piece of 2x4, you're going to be missing the top. Does that make sense? Because it's coming at an angle. Your 2 feet is actually here. So if you try to shoot a staple or a screw here, it's going to miss that board, because 2 feet's lined up over here. Does that make sense now? Okay. So, by finding the fastener, because you're more likely to have gotten the fastener in the correct place, finding the fastener, bringing that out, you're more likely to hit that angled board. Okay? But it's personal preference. Okay? As far as spacing, now that I've mentioned measuring, toggles. For a platform, you're always going to have 3 toggles for a standard stock platform, and they always want to be 2 feet apart. Okay? So that's why we have 3 toggles, because we've got an 8-foot platform. So we're staggering them 2 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet. Okay? That gives us plenty of support on the plywood based on the architectural mass that we did that you guys don't have to worry about. So that there is no bow in the plywood. When somebody walks on it, has plenty of support to cover the majority of the cast being on one platform at the same time, yada, yada, yada. Okay, all the math has been done, this is how a stock platform should be constructed. Okay, realistically, plywood can support you over 4 feet of an unsupported span, but it bows a little bit. Okay, so part of the reason why we put a toggle every 2 feet is for comfort as well as safety. Okay, it does give us the support that we need to make us safe. Plywood's not going to break over 4 feet. What it's going to do is it's going to flex, which means that when you walk on it, you're going to feel it give a little bit, which is going to make you feel a little bit uneasy. So adding extra support to over-engineer it makes the actors and everybody working on it feel a little bit more at ease. Okay? So that's sometimes why we would over-engineer something, to make it more solid. All right.